Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this morning's Knowledge Bank. Today's session is entitled Building Safety Cases Don't Panic, and is going to be presented by RiskBase. They are going to talk you through the impending deadline for building safety cases and what property managers should be prepared for. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please submit them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we will try to get through as many as possible. Today's webinar is also being recorded, so if you miss it live, then you will be able to watch it back via our YouTube channel. And if you would like a copy of the slides, please let me know and I will try to arrange for them to be sent to you. That is all from me. I am now going to pass you over to Adam and Peter.
Hello, good morning all. My name is Pete Thomas. I'm a health, safety and fire professional, and I've worked for a number of organizations that are sort of working our way through the safety case process. So Adam's asked me to come on here, deliver this webinar, and we're just going to go through some of what we think is the technical guidance, but an awful lot of like what is our opinion and our understanding, and what we've really learned from working with people in the industry. So yeah, that's me, Adam.
I'm the technical director of RiskBase. So we're helping people build management systems to produce safety cases, safety case reports, mandatory occurrence reporting. So I'm coming from a bit of a technical perspective, and the idea is that Pete comes from a bit more of a end user use case perspective.
Yeah, so just to give you a bit of an overview, we'll try not to make this overly technical, but the Building Safety Act, I think we've got to sort of remember that this came from the Hackett Review into fire safety. And if we look at the legislation itself, the legislation is very slim on the ground. I think that's probably fair to say, Adam.
I think that, the legislation's it's not particularly prescriptive.
Yes.
The difficulty is the lack of guidance and the sheer quantity of secondary legislation that sits around the Building Safety Act. Lots of people are looking at the Building Safety Act and they're not seeing there's 30 bits of secondary legislation. There's 8 or 9, I think it's 7 actually, that relate to the safety cases themselves. And it's a shame that it's not all in one place.
Yeah, absolutely. And even when we were sort of going through all of I think, to be fair, I'm going to be honest, even we were shocked that there's 30 pieces of secondary legislation. When we were writing this presentation, we were sort of looking, going, how much secondary legislation actually is there? And when we realized that there's actually up to 30, I think even we were quite surprised. And I think many people on this call, this webinar, would be surprised as to just how much secondary legislation there is. But a lot of the Hackett Review, there were sort of 8 key recommendations that came out of it, and an awful lot was around the spirit of the guidance, the spirit of the legislation. And I think you're right that the legislation itself isn't very prescriptive, and we'll get onto that. But I think one of the things that the Building Safety Act did is introduce this whole new concept of a PAP, this principal accountable person and accountable person, with the principal accountable person sort of quite clearly defined as the person with the responsibility for the exterior of the building. So, we can get this industry can get very complicated with different leases, different management arrangements, but they've tried to be quite clear on this. It's the principal accountable person is the organization, the corporate body responsible for the external wall of the building. I think initially when they wanted this to come in, they wanted it to be a named individual, but it got so complicated that they went with the corporate body. And then
there's some confusion as well in that the PAP is expected to name an individual on top of that. And the PAP can even name another organization. So the PAP could nominate their block manager, or they could nominate the property manager within the block manager, but that doesn't change who the PAP is. There's a little bit of confusion around that. It's really clear that they cannot delegate, neither the PAP nor any of the accountable people. As we're saying, the PAP is the principal accountable person. None of those duties can be delegated away.
Yeah, Absolutely, absolutely. And I think we said that the Q&A box is open. So if you've got any questions throughout this, then feel free to ask questions. But if it's a detailed question about the PAP and the AP within your organization, we're probably not going to answer that one because it's really complicated. So there's part 3, part 4, and part 5 of the Building Safety Act, and we're specifically going to be looking at part 4 within these slides. And then at the bottom of the slides, you'll get the slide deck. We can send this out to you. So anybody that wants a copy of this slide deck, please get in touch and we can send that out. And then what we've done is we put all the legislative and the government guidance links at the bottom. And believe me, these links can actually be hard to find. It can be hard to find some of this guidance. So it's all linked into the slide deck. So what are the deadlines? So you probably know all these deadlines already, but by the 1st of October in 2023, you had to register the building with the safety regulator. And then the key building information. So this was around, I think it was around 45 pieces of information the regulator requested through like a government portal. It was all drop-down menus, and you had to select the most relevant area. And even that was really quite complicated for most buildings, I think. And I think one of the complications with the key building information was around how does what we have in the building fit in the regulator's definition, if that makes sense. But you had to submit the key building information 28 days after registration. And I think they believe that there's around about 13,000 buildings registered. But there's a lot of estimates that not all buildings have been registered. There were some challenges with the definition and perhaps buildings that had fallen outside. And then the next deadline, which is coming up very, very quickly, imminently, is this 1st of April deadline where the regulator will start requesting safety case reports. Now, I've seen some of the emails. The regulator is already sending out emails to the accountable persons, requesting or putting them on a pre-warning that their building will be requested as one of the first. So the regulator initially released this guidance that was like tranche-based, like almost like a triage-based system. And now in this email, it's defined who's going to be requested first. So it's any building 50 meters, above 50 meters with 11 or more flats, between 30 and 49.9 meters with 227 plus flats, any buildings with any ACM cladding, and any large panel system buildings that have a gas supply, I think. But look, what I'm trying to say is if you're within that first group, then the chances are you will have had an email already. So you should be very aware that you're going to be one of the first people to be requested. And then once this request comes through formally, you've got 28 days then to submit that safety case report. But I think overall, the regulator thinks it's going to take them like, what, 5 years to get through all 13,000 buildings. So it's quite a long time. This is quite a long process, unless you're in that first tranche.
Yeah. So the large panel systems, I'm going to guess that there aren't going to be many private blocks with these concrete LPS systems. So they're the kind of the big concrete panels built between 56 and 73. And yeah, they have to have a gas supply and not have had reinforcement works to be called within this first tranche.
Yeah, totally agree. So we've got the duties of the APs and the PAP. So I think we're gonna you can read this on the screen. So there's no point in me reading these out to you. But if you look at duties of the accountable persons, Section 83, Section 84, 88, and 89, this obviously refers to the Building Safety Act itself. And then you've got the duties of the principal accountable person, all the way from Section 77 to register the building, and then through to Section 93 to implement a complaints management system. And yeah, I don't think there's anything else to say on that, Adam, is there really? It's just an informative slide, to be honest, that you're going to get a copy of anyway.
Yeah, it's just there more as a reference. And the fact that there are so many sections of the Building Safety Act that apply to this stuff. But we're just focusing predominantly on the safety case bits, and then we'll touch into some of the other sections as we need to.
Yeah, absolutely. So, on the operational side, and as a safety and fire manager, so someone with the responsibility ultimately to produce, these safety case reports, I must admit, I got sort of bogged down in all the guidance, and it was Adam that took me back to the legislation. And I actually think this is really, really important to look at, what Section 83 of the Building Safety Act says in relation to assessing building safety risks. And, a lot of that is down to the golden thread data. It's down to, all of the building information that we have, because we need that in order to be able to assess the building risks, right? And then we've obviously got Section 84 is the safety case itself. Now, the safety case isn't, a document or such. And I think people keep making this mistake where they go, well, I've got this safety case. It's this documented report. It's going to be like 200 pages long. It's, it's not. It's all of the building information management. It's everything there as to how we manage building safety risks. And then we've obviously got Section 85 as produce the report. And it's quite interesting. Oh, go on.
The key thing around Section 84, the safety case, is that it's a management system. And if you read other bits of the legislation, the legal requirement is to have an SMS, which is a safety management system. It doesn't, if you talk to a techie like me, I'm going to say, obviously, that needs to be a bit of software, but it doesn't have to be a bit of software. It has to be a process that ensures that your risk assessments and your assertions about why a building is safe, and we'll go into that in a minute, how you're managing it. And if there is a problem, how you reevaluate that assertion. So if you're saying something is safe because XYZ happens, you need to have a system that makes sure that XYZ does happen. And if it doesn't, how big an issue is it? What are you going to do to fix it? And is the building still safe? So that's that safety management system, and the safety case report is purely documenting that management system along with some key bits of information from the golden thread.
Yeah, agreed.
I think I don't know whether anybody's been on any of the BSR webinars. They're getting kind of less technical. The thing that they are really starting to push now is they're really promising that they're going to be a proportionate and pragmatic regulator. Whereas I think they started 18 months ago being rather more aggressive about things. I think they've realized that it's taken them a long time to gear up, and that they need to give the sector some time to gear up as well. So the message really is that you won't get caught out if you try and do the job properly. But if you want to play to the minimum standards and just tick as few boxes as possible, you probably will. And the focus that we're trying to say is, look, get your ducks in a row, but do it in order, because if you try and start with the safety case report, you're going to make a whole load of promises that you can't maintain. You've got to go and do that data collection, do those risk assessments, build that safety management system, and then create the report. We're seeing lots of people trying to create that report first.
Yeah, we had this conversation before, didn't we, about risk assessment? So what we were saying is that, if you look at the HSE's the HSE is the regulator, right? So if you look at the HSE's prosecution percentage, their frequency, they've got a 94% success rate in criminal prosecution. They don't muck around. They don't run. They don't run on guesses. 94% is a phenomenal success rate for prosecution, for criminal prosecution anyway. And one of the things that you're required to do under the management of safety regs is you're required to produce a risk assessment, right? I promise I won't get too technical here, so don't switch off. But you've got to produce a risk assessment. So it's your document. You're assessing your own risks of your building. And then what the HSE do is they come along and they review that when something's gone wrong, and they've gone, well, you didn't do that. You've assessed that you needed to have that in place and you haven't done it. So they prosecute you using your own risk assessment as evidence against you. Does that make sense? And I fear that this is going to be similar with the safety case report, is that a lot of people are going to produce a safety case report in order to hit the standards that the guidance has told people to achieve. And they're just going to write the safety case report saying, we've done X, Y, and Z, we've hit this standard.
People are trying to do templates, and they're asking they're asking us, they're asking for the regulator for these templates. You go, well, if you use a template and that template doesn't fit your building, And it's trying to say that you'll manage a risk which is either doesn't exist or is negligible in a certain way, and then something else goes wrong, you could get prosecuted for doing something that you didn't even need to do.
Yes, because the objective isn't to produce a safety case report and get a safety case report signed off, right? You know, the objective is to ensure that we've implemented the process to ensure that we have a safe building. And the safety case report is just almost like an exec summary explaining to the regulator what we've done to ensure that process is in place. So if the safety case report just ticks the boxes and says, yeah, we've done all this stuff and we haven't done it, if something goes wrong and the regulator comes in, they're going to go, well, your report is wrong. Like, you know, we signed off the report, we said that's fine, but they're not signing off the safety of the building. They're never going to accept responsibility for that. So, you know, I think that's one of the things that I fear by going at this project the wrong way round, by going at it from the safety case report and working back rather than producing a good process and a good safety case and then producing the report as an output from that.
Yeah, I also think in terms of the risk assessments, it's really important that you get those risk assessments right. There's often something that we see a lot is you'll get one argument which says, well, here are the modern standards. You see this a lot with fire doors. You know, they've all got to be brought up to modern standards, and you know, they're expecting a building with 50-year-old doors to have perfect doors. And, well, it's not going to happen. But then you then see at the other side of the coin, which says, well, you know, we've got a whole load of building standards from the 1960s, CP3. Well, that the building was built to those standards, so the standard of the day is surely acceptable now. And the answer kind of is, well, no, it probably isn't. And there's a balance between the two. And the whole thing is, this is about a risk assessment. And too often, risk assessments aren't risk assessing things. They're just auditing things to a standard. What you need your surveyors and assessors to do, and that's fire risk assessments, fire strategies, door surveys, and structural stuff, is to risk assess it. Don't accept that they're saying you need to just go and fix something. What's the risk of that thing not being fixed? What are the other ways to mitigate it? What's the most effective thing to do? It's having a proportionate approach is really key.
Yeah, I agree. And I almost missed the most important part. So the important part is, right, so we're producing a safety case report here. I'm on the operational side, you know, the management side, and I'm producing a safety case report, and I find something is missing or something I don't believe hits the required standard. Well, don't write it in the safety case report, you know, as if it's in place, like it's an aspirational standard. Just be honest about it. And then at the bottom of the safety case report, there's the opportunity to put an action plan, right? You can literally put in an action plan and say, you know, upon undertaking the safety case process, upon undertaking the risk assessment process, we identified X, Y, and Z. And this is our plan to mitigate that. And it's going to take 3, 6, 9, 12 months. You know, we've identified whatever it is a piece of missing documentation within the golden thread. You know, we're going to look at implementing retrospective fire strategies. We're going to look at, you know, we've identified the building has changed over the time since it was built. And this is what we're going to do about it. Don't just write it in the safety case report to tick a box, if that makes sense. There is an opportunity, you know, and I guess this is the don't panic bit. Like, don't panic, just put it in the action plan. This is our plan. This is how we're going to deal with it.
Well, the regulatory requirement is all reasonable steps. Is it all reasonable steps? All reasonable steps have been taken. And that's not quite the same as the suitable and sufficient claim that fire risk assessors like to use, but you just got to demonstrate that you've done everything that's reasonable within a reasonable time frame.
Yeah, so I probably got excited, didn't I, Adam? And I jumped ahead a little bit, but that's fine. That's fine. So we've got the safety case versus the safety case report. Okay, so the safety case is the management system and all of the information within it, as Adam alluded to. And this will be the safety management system. So not a specific safety management system for the building, but it's your organizational safety management system, you know, your HSG 65, ISO 45001, whatever safety management system is in place. You know, that's got to be up to scratch. And then also how you manage safety and risk within the building, both on a structural and on a fire safety basis.
And I think the thing to also look at is where the safety case concepts come from. So for anybody that's in, you know, fire or, you know, general risk assessment or property, this is an entirely new thing. You know, it's only really been used in aviation, nuclear, oil and gas. So kind of these super high risk processes, whereas we're being asked to retrofit this into something that's fairly low risk, which is residential block management.
Yeah, I think, do you know what? I think you've touched on a point, Adam, that a lot of people don't realize, and I don't think a lot of safety professionals realized at first either, because we, you know, safety professionals, we don't all work in the nuclear industry, surprisingly, you know. You know, a lot of us just work in low, medium risk industries like, you know, building management, retail, that sort of area. And so, yeah, what you've done is you've taken this very complicated process with quite complicated terminology, you know, hazards, HAZOPs, etc. And we've adapted it. I won't say shoehorned it, because that sounds like I'm discrediting, but we've adapted it to try and fit into what is traditionally a relatively low risk industry, you know, in comparison to nuclear and you know, coma and oil and gas, etc. It's a relatively low risk industry. And this is where a lot of the challenge has come, is that the safety cases process, it's not new. It's a very old process. It's been in place for a very long time. And I think the other point that you mentioned is that, you know, this is about building safety. It's not a fire safe. It's not a piece of fire safety legislation. And I think a lot of people are forgetting that, is that this legislation, the Building Safety Act, can be changed at any moment with the stroke of a pen by the Secretary of State to include any other building risks. So I can foresee that, you know, in a couple of years' time, if we were to have a Legionella outbreak in central London from a cooling tower, that buildings with cooling towers would have to be included in the HRB regime, and cooling towers would have to be included in the safety case report.
Yeah. I think the only other thing that's on this slide is this kind of golden thread thing. It's really important to hammer this home. You need one thing, whatever it is, to store all of this information. Got to be digital, it's got to be secure, it's got to be stored in a way that people can use it. So, which basically means it's got to be accessible, and the people that need to get to that information, and that could be a risk assessor, it could be a contractor, it could be a door surveyor, but also it could be residents, and we'll go on to some data sharing stuff, but just having a network share drive or a Dropbox probably doesn't cut it unless you're a very small organization that's quite organized.
Yeah. And again, operationally, you know, working with a number of companies, you know, I've seen companies go, right, they're starting from the end of the safety case report, and they're going, right, we've got to produce a safety case report, we need documents X, Y, and Z, and they're pulling all those into separate folders, and it sort of misses the spirit of the legislation and this concept of, you know, digital management of fire safety documentation, digital management of all the building information, and particularly this single source of truth.
Yeah. So in this slide is about the building assessment certificate application. I think there's necessarily confusion around this, but the PAP will get invited to apply for the building assessment certificate. So when the regulator is ready for you, not when you're ready for the regulator, obviously, they will suddenly turn around to you and go, by the way, all this stuff that you were supposed to be doing over the last few years, you've got 28 days to prove you've done it. Hopefully you've got a safety case report, at least in a draft form. Well, it would have been a full form, but you will have produced at least one. So it needs updating. Hopefully you've got a safety management system so that updating that safety case report is at the touch of the button and at touch of a button, and the things that Pete was talking about, like the action plans, will be automatically populated within these safety case reports. But you've got 28 days to provide it from the day they ask you for it. They'll then issue you, assuming everything's good, with the back. That should be valid for 5 years. If they issue the building assessment certificate, it's not a warranty that the building is safe. If they don't issue you the certificate, doesn't mean that it's not safe. But it'll be pretty much impossible to sell or do anything to that building unless you have the building assessment certificate, if you've been invited to apply. If they look at your safety case report and your document submission, of which part of it is the safety case report, and they're not 100% happy with it, or you've got other mitigation work that goes ahead, they could refuse, or they might issue you with something, issue you with a certificate that doesn't last 5 years. So if you've got loads of remediation work going on in the building, or if you have been behind in some of that data collection, but you can demonstrate that you're getting on top of it, they might say, we'll come back in a year, we'll come back in 2 years. But broadly, should be a 5-year process. And the 3 things they're going to ask for when you apply is mandatory occurrence reporting system and all the documentation that goes around that. And that is broadly, I will touch on it in more detail, but it's broadly any issue that happens with the building needs to go into one system that will then report things to the regulator. There's other legislation, which means that you need to report other things to the local fire rescue service as well. So it's quite an important system. The resident engagement strategy, and there's lots of chatter around this, but resident engagement and the resident engagement as a concept and a resident engagement strategy are 2 slightly separate things that we're going to try and combine into one, because there's a lot of information sharing requirements as part of this legislation and other legislation that kind of fits within that resident engagement strategy piece. And then the final thing, which in some ways is the big thing, the safety case report. But the safety case report is the product of the safety management system, mandatory occurrence reporting, and the engagement strategy.
Yep.
So if we touch on the mandatory occurrence reporting bit, I think this is where the legislation is just a little bit horrible. So the main part that defines mandatory occurrence reporting in the Building Safety Act says, and I'm just quoting it, it's at the top here, in prescribed circumstances, give prescribed information to the regulator by the prescribed time in the specified way. And to find out what the prescribed circumstances are, or the prescribed information, or the prescribed time, or what the specified way is, you have to go and refer to a whole load of secondary legislation. They don't tell you where it is, you've got to go and look at it. You go and read the guidance, again, it doesn't tell you what it is. So the secondary legislation is in that second link there, the higher risk buildings procedures England regulations. But basically your mandatory occurrence reporting system has to record any deaths in the building caused by building failure, any risk that could cause the structural failure or smoke or fire spread, and anything that might cause serious harm. So that could fall into, there are lots of different things that could fall into those circumstances. The key thing is one system, residents must be able to access that system. So it's not a bit of paper that's stored in the communal area. It's got to be an electronic system. If there's only one system and residents have got to be able to access it, unless you literally are going to drive over to the building and update a logbook. So that needs some real thought. But there's also the Fire Safety England regulations, which require any failure or fault with a fire protection, fire safety equipment in the building or a lift, that can't be fixed within 24 hours has to be reported to the local fire and rescue service.
And they are all over this. They are all over this. You know, again, I work with a number of different operators, number of different companies, and you know, the fire and rescue service, they're chasing this up on a regular basis. And the difficulty is with some of these things, right, is that you can spot a fault and it can't be rectified immediately. In fact, some faults can take like 6 months. You know, if you imagine there's like a design fault with something, I don't know, say like take a smoke vent system or something, and there's a design fault with it. You know, it could have to go back as part of defects. It can take 12 months to deal with that process. Now, you could put in temporary control measures, but honestly, fire and rescue service are all over this. They're chasing these up regularly, and yeah, they're on top of it.
I think also the difficult thing with the Fire Safety England regs and submitting this to the local fire and rescue service is that if you're a national operator and you've got blocks all over the UK, every fire and rescue service has got a different system that they want you to use. But if you go back to the legislation, it doesn't tell you how you have to submit that information. It just tells you that you need to tell the local fire and rescue service. So you can send an email to the fire and rescue service as long as you've told them you've done your job. And I would go on to the next slide if it would work. Sorry, there's a question here. If a lift is out of action for more than 24 hours, the fire and rescue service need to be told right away. No, I think they only need to be told if it's going to be if it will be out of action for more than 24 hours.
Yeah, and is it just a firefighting lift or an evacuation lift as well? I'm assuming it'll just be a firefighting lift or evac lift. It wouldn't just be a normal passenger lift.
Yes.
And it's only if it goes out of action, and if you know it can't be reinstated within a 24-hour period, or if it's anticipated that it can't be reinstated within a 24-hour period, then you've got to tell them as soon as reasonably practicable. I'm not sure if that's exactly what the legislation says. We're not, you know, there's a lot of guidance here, but I'm pretty sure that's it. You've got to tell them as soon as possible.
Yeah, as soon as it's out of action, because the idea being that this is supposed to be equipment that they expect to be able to use, so they want to know that it's not effective when they arrive.
Yes. Right.
Okay.
Are you taking this one, Adam?
Go on, you have a go.
So resident engagement. So resident engagement is a really complicated topic. And again, from an operational point of view, I see a number of operators that go, oh, okay, a resident engagement strategy, this is just a policy, right? We'll just write a policy and we'll make that available to our residents. You know, we'll write a couple of pages on paper, and it's not. It's a lot more than that. And as Adam has put at the top of the slide there, it's a requirement under the Building Safety Act, but also the Fire Safety England regulations, and also the fire safety orders, so the reg reform fire safety order. So there's an awful lot of information to do here in terms of the keeping and provision of information. It requires the sharing of an awful lot of building and safety information, including the safety case report, including FRAs. And this isn't just your current fire risk assessment. This is all of the fire risk assessments that you've got in place or potentially got available. How you manage building safety assets, the PPMs, you know, your PPM, your planned preventative maintenance schedule, which you'll probably track on a CAFM system or something like that. You know, how are we going to share this data? Maintenance schedules and the outcomes of inspections.
I think it's worth saying this. I mean, ideally, you kind of have this in some electronic portal that everybody can access.
Oh, you'd have to. You'd have to.
Well, most of us. So if you're a RiskBase user, it's very easy. It's a toggle to switch it on and off. The thing is, a lot of us don't want residents to see old FRAs.
Yeah.
Quality of an FRA now is in a totally different place to where it was a few years ago. So you can have a system where they request this. So you might not want to be publishing all of this information, but you have to have a system, which means that it is accessible because it's part of the golden thread. So one system and one process to manage it by law, but the law doesn't specifically say it needs to be immediately accessible by these people.
And this is interesting, right? So say we talk about fire doors, because I am going to talk about RiskBase. I know you probably don't want me to, Adam. I'm going to talk about it. One of the reasons why I like RiskBase is because I like how it shares the information. So say we take fire doors. The fire doors are in there individually, and you can share them as part of the RiskBase resident engagement portal. So if you have a resident in flat number 101, say, they can access all of the information that's relevant to them, including their individual flat entrance door check. It'll give them a picture of the door. It'll give them all the information at the door. Because operationally, the way I see it, and one of the things that concerns me is if someone says, okay, I want to see information about my flat entrance door. If we've gone and got a fire door survey done, it could have 200 fire doors on there. It could have a plan on there. It could have a plan of, the rear entrance through the car park, through the plant room, secure information that you wouldn't necessarily want people to know. This could be commercially confidential information. It could have information that you would need to protect from a security point of view. Now, like you say, Adam, you can't withhold some of this information. There's bits that you can, but you're going to have to be very careful. The idea is that you release an awful lot of this information. It's about transparency with your tenants, with your residents. So there's this balance to hit here where we want to give them enough information that they don't feel like they have to pry further, that they feel confident, that they feel like they feel safe within the building. But we don't just want to share, this is everything. This is all of the fire door surveys for the last 10 years. Because as well, again, picture this scene. You give the flat 101, they say, can I have a copy of the fire door survey, right? And you give them a copy of the fire door survey for the entire building, and they walk down the hall to flat 113 and they go, here's a copy of the fire door survey for your flat entrance door. And there's a photograph on here at the side of the door, and I can see inside your flat on the photograph. There's an awful lot of considerations here that I don't think people have realized quite how big this resident engagement strategy piece is, particularly around the requesting and the sharing of information. And particularly if your approach is just, well, I'm going to write a 4-page strategy and I'm going to give it to our residents. It's very one-sided. There's an awful lot of give and take here.
But there's also, if you kind of actually get onto the engagement piece,
yeah,
providing information to residents, but it's about trying to engage them on it. And especially in the private leasehold sector, most leaseholders don't particularly want to be engaged in fire safety. They want you to spend as little money as possible on it. I mean, they don't want to put at risk, but they don't really want their time wasted. So the key thing is about trying to provide them relatively concise and relevant information. From a block manager perspective, you want to say, look, we know you're spending this extra money on fire safety. We don't want to do it. We're being made to do it. But actually, look, here's the value. You can see that we're doing quite a lot. There's a lot of information that we've collected and managed for this. But the resident engagement strategy, a part of that is going to have to be something that says, how did you engage residents? So how many people have looked at this stuff? When we look at Fire Safety England, the Fire Safety England regulations, and Fire Safety England compliance is so key to Building Safety Act compliance. So one of the things for Fire Safety England regs, you've got to talk to your residents every year, make sure they understand the importance of a fire door, how to escape the building, blah, blah, blah. Now, you could just send a leaflet round, but you can't prove that you've engaged that resident, and that's an opportunity to engage that resident. You've also got to do a flat entrance door check once a year, or at least try to. Well, there's your opportunity to engage a resident. We've got some tools launching this year so that residents can do their own flat entrance door checks. They're basic checks. It requires them to take videos and pictures and stuff, but it's a relatively simple thing to do. That's demonstrating engagement, and that's demonstrating that a resident now understands fire safety. So the engagement strategy has got to demonstrate how you're talking to those people. It's not leaflets and posters in communal areas and standard mail merge letters.
Well, one issue with that is the language issue as well. You know, if you look at some buildings that I've seen, again, operationally, you could have 30, 40 different languages spoken in a building. And, you know, a leaflet, how do you produce that in 30, 40 different languages and translate it and everything else? You know, online, digital, that has to be the way to go, right?
The one of the things that the safety case report, and I know this is a later slide, but the safety case report requires is understanding those residents. So what are the vulnerabilities of the residents? Now, when we talk about vulnerabilities, we think of disability and we think of frailty broadly. But if you don't speak English, that's an issue. So how are you addressing those language concerns? If you're using portals and systems, very easy, I'll say it's not very easy. It's much easier to translate that information, both from the person visiting a website and from a system perspective in terms of you can automatically translate a page. These links at the bottom of this slide are unfortunately really worth reading, because there's a lot there, and there's things that we've missed out because we're not talking about the Fire Safety England requirements, and we haven't touched on the changes to the fire safety order, because the fire safety order also requires you to share risks and fire precautions within a building, and that's irrelevant of the height. So all this stuff that we're talking about obviously only applies to HRBs, but the Fire Safety England requirements and some of the Fire Safety England requirements and all of the fire safety order requirements apply to all buildings. So whether you've got a block of 3 flats or a block of 200 flats, you still have to share fire precautions and key risk information and provide that information on the importance of fire doors to all of those buildings.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay, I think we've laboured this point enough. So this is not working very well. So this is the key thing, the safety case report. And I'm going to answer a question. I'm going to hand it over to you. The important thing with the safety case reports is going back to this management system, the safety case. How are you managing all of this information? And one of the questions we've been asked is, what type of software systems have you seen that work really well for the storage and sharing of documents / golden thread? A lot of people I've spoken with have said a shared drive type thing, but that seems a little basic. A shared drive, really, for a block manager of any complexity or a building, an HRB of any complexity, just isn't going to work. The answer of what software do I think is really great? Well, there's only one answer to that, obviously, which is RiskBase. But from an evaluation perspective, it's got to be a bit of software that understands assets within a building. So I've got to be able to say, I've got a lift, and because I've got a lift, I need this ppm, and I need to be able to attach risks to that lift and have actions on it, so that when I produce a safety case report, if that's an evacuation lift, I can see what the issues are that are raised, because it has to be managed within this safety management system. And the same way that you have a door, if you've got a brand new block of flats, you'll say, oh, I've got a fire door. This fire door needs to be of a certain standard, and that standard is defined within the fire strategy. It's been installed by a third-party approved contractor. It's got third-party accreditation, so it's a BWF certifier or BM Trada door, whatever it is. I've had a destructive or an intrusive inspection on it, so the architraves have come off a percentage of the doors, and I know they have been installed properly, and it's not just a whole load of pink foam behind the 3-inch gaps. And I've done my Fire Safety England checks every quarter on those doors. So you need to be able to track all of that stuff on an asset, and that's really what the golden thread is about. So a traditional approach to compliance management, which you will see from a lot of the property management software, probably doesn't cut it, because you're not saying, oh, I need to do a fire risk assessment every year, every 2 years, tick, it's done. Well, no, it's not. It's about how are you managing the risk, not just the actions within the building. So going back to this safety case stuff, output of your safety management system, there isn't a shortcut to producing a safety case report. First, yes, you can go and pay some of these big companies to go and write you a safety case report, but if you haven't got the information in there, it's not really going to work.
Yeah, and the difficulty is I mean, what do the HSC are charging £156 an hour to review these. So there's a real balance to be hit here. You know, operationally, if you've got 100, 200 buildings, right, this could be a massive cost now. Because what were they saying? It can take them like a day, 2 days to review a safety case report, you know, and I think we've seen some that are like 30,000, 40, 50,000 words. And, you know, that's going to take an awful lot of time to review, send back, ask questions. And so there's this balance that you've got to hit, this proportionality, is that you've got to make sure that you provide the regulator with sufficient information to give them the confidence to issue the BAC, the Building Assessment Certificate. But if you just try and chuck everything in the safety case report, including the kitchen sink, this could sting you because you've just gone overboard. You've chucked everything in there just to try and get this signed off. But it could take them, what, 3, 4, 5 days to review the thing. And if you multiply that by 100, 200, 300, that's a huge cost that I don't think many people have really budgeted for. I don't think people have really considered this.
I think you're probably also going to open a can of worms because you're going to open that competency argument against yourself. You're going to give them a whole load of ammo in terms of here's a whole load of risk assessments, and they go and pick holes in all of those risk assessments because
we can all do that. Yeah.
Well, exactly. But also, you know, if you've got 3 risk assessments, even they could be the best risk assessments in the world, and I'll find inconsistencies between all 3 of them. So it'll be saying, well, what is the correct answer? So you'll end up with an action plan coming back from the regulator, basically saying, prove to us you know what you're doing. Which, if that's being said directly to the PAP, that's okay. But most PAPs will have an agent in front of them. And it's the agent that's going to look pretty stupid. It's going to be the block manager that's going to be struggling with this stuff.
And I guess the other thing that we haven't mentioned is the HRB portal. You know, that all of this will be available on the HRB portal. So tenants can go on now, they can log on online, they can look at the high-risk building portal, they can find their building, they can find who the PAP is, what the address is, what the telephone number is, what the email address is. And even if that PAP is a company, they just put that in company's house and they can see exactly who the directors are, what their names are, what other companies they're directors of, you know, and if there's an issue with this and the regulator, you know, finds a massive issue, I can't see why they wouldn't just publish that on the HRB portal, to be honest. But I think originally when we looked at this, if you look at the government guidance in the bottom left-hand corner, preparing a safety case report, it looks very simple. You know, it's like, what, like 7 headings or something? It looks very simple. And I think on the face of it, they're trying not to make it too complicated. But it's not that complicated if you've got the safety case and these processes and all of these systems in place. If you haven't got that, then this process does start to become a very complicated issue. But if you're looking at the guidance, the preparing a safety case report, I mean, you know, you need some basic things like who's the PAP, who are the APs, you need under the FSO, you know, who are the other responsible persons. So if you've got like a retail outlet or something on the ground floor of your HRB, you know, those would be, you know, a responsible person under the Regulatory Reform Fire Safety Order. So their details need to go in there. You need a basic overview of the building construction, you know, what the building's made of. Now, it shouldn't be complicated because all of that was submitted as part of your key building information. You know, what is it, like a half-page summary, similar to what you submitted as part of that KBI information. Try and put it in the language that the regulator understands. That'll probably help you out. One of my favorite bits on this safety case report is the action plan, because I think for me, that's the bit where it's open and honest. That's the transparent bit. That's the bit where we can say to the regulator, look, we've gone through this process and we've identified X, Y, and Z. And I don't think that should be missed out. We've also got an overview of the safety management system. Again, you know, if you're operating ISO 45001, or if you're an established organization with a good safety management team, safety management system, that should be fairly straightforward. And again, it's going to be the same across most of your buildings. You know, the safety management system shouldn't really change too much. I think the biggest thing about the safety case report is this hazard concept. And I think this is the bit that's catching a lot of people out because, again, we're not used to this terminology. Hazard is something that's come from high-risk industry, HAZID. And it's a process. It's a scenario-based process that we haven't really dealt with before. And so just to give you an example, the whole concept of hazard, and I'll put my hand up here and say, by the way, I specialize in buildings, the same as everyone else. I worked a little bit in oil and gas, but I'm not sitting here professing to be a hazard expert, but you don't have to be. The point is it's a process where you get the people that understand the risks in terms of fire safety and structural safety. These are the two things that we've been asked to look at here in terms of the safety case and the Building Safety Act. Structural safety and fire safety is getting those people around a table and identifying all of the possible hazards, all of the things that could go wrong, and putting that in a scenario-based process. So as an example, a scenario could be, well, will the balcony fall off? We've seen that balcony collapse. It's happened. Will a balcony fall off? Let's take that scenario. And then from that scenario, we use this claim, argument, evidence model, which we'll go on to in another slide. But that, just to clarify, a big part of this safety case process is this risk assessment process that's based on scenarios. And the regulator provides us with those. So the government guidance there on the bottom, the third tab across, which is assessing safety risks in high-rise residential buildings, that gives you the scenarios. They've actually given you a list of around about 12 different scenarios that you should consider, both from a fire safety point of view and a structural safety point of view. And it's all sorts of things like fire spread from residential unit into another residential unit, fire spread from into an escape stairwell, fire spread vertically between floors. And then the idea is that you get all these people around a table, your fire engineer, your experts, and you ask the questions and say, okay, well, what have we got in place to prevent this? And that's another key point of the safety case report, is it will ask you who was involved in the production of the safety case report and what's their competence. And that's part, to me, by the way, this is my opinion, is that's part of this HAZID process. It's again, providing the regulator with the confidence that you've gone to a number of different specialisms and you've got them around a table and you've said, okay, these are the scenarios. And as I alluded to before, I can see this coming out for cooling towers for Legionella. So eventually we're going to have to look at this HAZID process and we're going to have to call in a Legionella expert or EHO. What are your thoughts on that, Adam?
I mean, the thing is, you talk to most people and say, yeah, you've got to follow a HAZID process to go and put all of these potential hazards and scenarios into a risk assessment. Everybody's just, they're going to go to sleep.
Yeah, yeah. I've probably lost people on the webinar already.
Well, no, I think the thing is, I don't think there are going to be that many people on this call that are going to be producing these safety cases themselves.
Yes.
Just about saying the safety case report is the documentation of a process. You have to demonstrate that you've considered all of these scenarios. And this is where they have started to try and provide some guidance. There's the HSE safety toolkit there as well, which anybody that follows me on LinkedIn will see that I have regularly slated. But they're trying to give you some ideas of, think about these things. And all the safety case report is that documentation of thinking about those things. So whether you want to go and document a HAZID process, which, by the way, stands for hazard identification, whether you want to go and do that and do your scenario planning off the back of it, doesn't really matter. You've just got to show that you've used some competent people to look at all of those risks.
Spot on. Absolutely.
The other stuff I was going to talk about was kind of along structural. We keep saying it's fire and building safety. It's 80% of it, probably 90% of it is fire. The structural stuff, if you've got new buildings, you've probably not got to worry about the structural stuff at all. If you've got relatively old traditional built buildings, it's going to be a relatively simple process. The structural side is when you've got balconies, steel framing systems, slightly older buildings that have got a modern MMCs, modern methods of construction, where you've got to show where that fail, why it's safe, and where that failure could come from, how you're re-inspecting it, and how you're mitigating any of it. We see that as a slightly simpler part of the safety case report.
Adam, I'm aware that we've only got 5 minutes left, so we're going to have to start rattling through. We've got no more questions to get through, but
I was going to say, I'm surprised there's not a couple more questions. This is just worth touching on. It's the favoured methodology of the regulator. And the idea is that you manage a safety, or you have a safety management system, which is based on a claim, argument, evidence model. And what this means is, and they've got 12 scenarios that you want to come up with some claims for in the previous slides guidance. But this is just an example of the kind of things that you might put into this model. So you could have a claim that says fire shouldn't spread from one residential unit to the communal area or an escape route. So basically, the building should be safe because fire won't spread. We expect fires to happen. That's a normal thing, but we don't expect the fire to spread outside of the flat to another place of safety where it might affect someone else. And then you would have a list of arguments. And one of those arguments could be, or should be, the flat entrance doors are going to stop that fire from spreading outside of that flat. But you'd also have other types of compartmentation. You could go into external wall systems. There's lots of different things that would be arguments that would make that claim safe. But to validate that argument, you need to have evidence. And the evidence is, we've installed the doors properly, the doors are of a standard, and we go and check the doors, and residents know that door closers are really important, and we go and check the door closers. If, as part of that system, any of that evidence fails, so for instance, you're late doing your FSCR checks, so you get a big red bit on your management system that says, oh, this check's late, you then reevaluate your claim and argument and go, well, I'm 3 months late doing my resident door checks. Does my claim and argument still stand? And the answer probably would be, yeah, it's absolutely fine. And my mitigation is I'm just going to get it done quicker. Or a problem could be, I've got a whole load of doors where the closers aren't working. You go, well, does my claim and my argument stand? The answer probably would be, no, it doesn't. This is actually quite a serious breach and I need to go and fix it quickly. So that safety management system has to tie an action within an action plan back to a risk, which is effectively the opposite of a claim. So the risk is, the opposite of this claim is fire will spread from one residential unit into a communal area. So this is taking that action plan in your fire risk assessment and your safety case report back into that system. And that's the difficult thing that people have got to achieve, because you've got to keep reevaluating these claims and arguments. Have I explained that?
Yeah, you've explained it perfectly, Adam. To be honest, I'm not going to go over that again, if that's okay for time, but we have had a question. You've mentioned where a commercial unit exists, there will be a responsible person. If the PAP for the commercial unit is different to the PAP for the flats that sit above it, are the two building safety cases required? No. So the principal accountable person is the person that's responsible for the entire external structure of the building. They have the responsibility to ensure the building safety case is produced. If you have a commercial unit, that organization will be a responsible person, but under the FSO, under the Regulatory Reform Fire Safety Order. So they have to be referred to in the safety case report, but they wouldn't be a PAP, and they'd be unlikely to be an AP as well, because it's specifically the HRB, the residential element, that would make them a principal accountable person.
Cool. We've got one other question. With structural issues for the older building, once issues are identified, how do you manage and maintain the issues if the funds are low? I think the regulator does realise that there are restrictions there, but there is also a point which is, or that you might have to go to consultation on things, but it's also not their problem. It's the PAP's responsibility to make that safe. So they've got to put their hands in their pockets and get things done. Tough luck. But go back to what they're saying. They will be reasonable and proportionate, or whatever I said earlier.
Yep.
I don't want to bore everybody with a sales pitch, but RiskBase is what RiskBase does, is what we've been doing since 2007, actually. So if you have issues around management systems, compliance management, access, action management, engaging residents, trying to get information from your golden thread out into something that's a little bit more digestible, come and have a chat with us. We see organizations of all sizes, from the largest housing associations in the UK to some fairly boutique small block management companies. And there's not a lot of things that we haven't seen.
Yeah, agreed. And I haven't seen a resident engagement platform like it. I think the resident engagement platform is absolutely fantastic. So yeah, it's well worth having a look at.
And even if not interested in RiskBase, if you want some advice or a hand with things, you've got some questions, reach out to me or us, LinkedIn, email, however you want. And where we can help, we will. I think the webinar is going to be put on YouTube by Vicky.
Yes, correct. Yeah, as soon as the recording is processed later, I will pop it up on YouTube. I'll also email everyone that registered for the webinar with a link to that, so you can watch it back with a copy of the slides as well. So yeah, you'll all receive that hopefully by this afternoon.
Cool. And also we'll make the slide deck available, all the links in the slide deck to the legislation as well. That all works, so you can send that round.
Perfect. Lovely. All right, thank you both so much for your time today. That was brilliant. Thank you to everyone else that joined us. As I said, I will send that all out to you this afternoon. And if you want to join us for any more webinars, then take a look on the News on the Block website for what's coming up. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of your day. Have a lovely bank holiday weekend, everyone.
Thank you. See you later.
Bye, guys.
Amazing. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.